I'm Deborah Ann, and I wanted to show you a little bit about my process and welcome you to my studio and to my exhibit here. I do my work starting with a photograph. Some of them are my photographs, friends' photographs, or my son-in-law's photographs. The piece I'm working on right here is one that was my son-in-law's photograph. Now I take my photographs and I put them on the computer and put them in a photo editing program like I use Photoshop. And I work with the contrast and the color and filters, and I I keep enlarging it till the spot that I want it. Now this one isn't as large as the piece, so it was enlarged one other time. And the final enlargement, which is on my pattern, on my piece down here, the final enlargement is made on freezer paper. And the reason for that is that freezer paper, when cut apart, can be fused to fabric with an iron. Temporarily, it leaves no residue, but it leaves the pattern right where you want it in order to cut out the piece. I also put a fusible web of glue on the back. I use one called Wonder Under, but there's a number of them out there. So what I do from there is I have cut out one little piece, and I'm going to laminate it onto the fabric because this pattern piece is fusible. Then, using tiny shears, I cut it out carefully. Takes a minute here. Cutting it precisely to the shape, and you can see that it stays on the paper. Stays nicely in place most of the time while you're cutting it out. And you don't have to be incredibly precise with most pieces because they're an abstract shape anyway. I'm not trying to be literal. I cut out pieces based on color and shading. Then you simply take off the paper from the back of the fusible. So cute there for a second there. You lay it in place. Put a couple pins in it to hold it. Move the piece around it and iron it in place, and it becomes part of the finished piece. I do that with all of the pieces in this artwork, and when I'm done, then I will take it to my sewing machine, to my Bernina home machine, and I will sew around the edge in matching thread of all of the pieces in this, so they will be permanently connected to the backing fabric. After that, I take it to the quilting machine, put a batting and backing on it, and do a lot more design work on it, and then it will be a finished piece like the ones you see on the wall. Now that I have all of the pieces fused down to the background, I need to stitch them so that they will be fused permanently down and nothing's going to peel off your artwork. So I've put in a matching thread, and I'm doing the light yellow-green pieces. So I carefully stitch around even the tiniest pieces. Tie it off, lift my needle, go to the next tiny piece. So there it is. I have my edges stitched down so that they won't fray, they won't come up, and it's ready for the quilting machine when all of that's done. I will change threads for every color in here, and then it will be ready for quilting. But this is a long process. Hi, this is the next to the last step in the process of making this piece of artwork. The machine that I'm on now is a quilting machine. There's some really large ones that people use for quilting blankets that are much more complicated than this, but this one is plenty for me. The bed of the machine is 7 feet long, and the machine itself, it's hooked up so I can't show you, but the machine is on gimbals, so it works in any motion you want. It also has a stitch regulator on it, which is wonderful because, as you'll see when I start stitching, if I go very slowly so I can get some accuracy around my work, the machine will stitch very slowly. If I get in an area where I can move faster, I will get the same stitch length all the way through it instead of getting itty-bitty stitches that you can't stand or stitches that are half a yard long each. So here's how the machine works. You start it, and I'm going to go carefully around these areas. And then once I have outlined them, I will go back and try to fill in some of the black area so it'll recess. When I get done with this area, I go to another one. Now this one has been mostly outlined already, so I can go back and do some looser work in it. But the machine will go very fast. Sounds like it's going a million miles an hour. And that's all that needs to be done. As you can see, I've now finished this piece. After I finished all of the stitching on the quilting machine that we saw, I wound up cutting it to square it off and make it into the finished piece. Doing that, I wind up sometimes cutting off parts of the quilt that didn't work right. They just didn't make it balanced. Once I got it to that point, I added this little tiny edge of dark rose that kind of took this rose and balanced it over here. Then I put a binding around it, which I do by machine, and then there's a sleeve that I put across the back so that it can be hung at your place or in a show. So that's how I finish my pieces, and I want to thank you for coming to the show. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Susan Hahn. I'm a local artist. I'm a painter. I've worked in acrylics, oil for many years, and now I'm learning alcohol ink. I'd like to share a few things about alcohol ink with you today because I think you'll find it very fun. One reason I really enjoy it is because it allows me to be freer in my work. Rather than being able to manipulate and paint tiny details, you look at the big picture because alcohol ink cannot be manipulated the way other forms of media can be. So today I'm going to show you some things. You'll find out about what kind of supplies you need, and I'm going to show you some tricks. We're going to look at various backgrounds to put your ink on, and I'm going to show you how to do some flowers. Before you get started with your alcohol ink experience, there are certain pieces of equipment that you really need to have. First of all, remember that alcohol ink is a flammable substance. Don't smoke around it. Don't have any open flames. Also, you should be careful and wear a mask. Here's the kind of mask that I use. You could use a respirator. They're a little bit uncomfortable. Today I'm not going to be using the mask because I'm not going to be spraying very much, and I'm doing this so that I can speak to you more clearly. Additionally, you need to wear gloves. The cheapest gloves will do. Here's the example of the kind of gloves that I wear. It's important to wear them because the ink will stain your fingers and you will not be able to get that ink off. The kind of alcohol we use is 91% isopropyl alcohol. You need to have that because you will be using containers to spray and drop alcohol on your canvas. I use this to spray broader areas. I use this little atomizer to get into smaller areas, and this is simply a dropper that you can use to be very precise in how you do things. These are my inks. I use many, many inks, many, many colors. You might want to do this. I found it to be very handy. I have many colors of ink. It's hard looking at the containers, here's a sample of them, to know exactly what colors you're dealing with, and you can see that they tend to be a little bit subtle. It'll help you learn your colors if you do some kind of a little chart. If you'll see, I have the inks, and then I have the names of the inks so that I can refer to them as I decide what colors I want to use in the paintings I'm working on. I use painter's tape, and in fact, I use it on some of the work I'll be showing you in a few minutes. And to cut that so that I don't always have straight edges, I just use a little X-Acto knife. Sometimes I want to thin down my ink with alcohol because the ink is very concentrated. I'll put a couple of drops in there with some alcohol, and then I'll use a little brush, and I'll show you some of that in a few minutes as well. Most importantly, aside from the ink and the alcohol, of course, are the blowers. To manipulate this ink, you need to be able to blow it around the surface. And it's important that your surface be impervious. So don't use paper for your inks, and don't use raw canvas or linen. It has to be gessoed. You can use a board. That will work as well. But when you drop the ink, you have to blow it. And so here I have a blower. It blows hot air. You can't regulate the amount of air coming out of it, and so you have to be careful to use it. You can see basically the diameter of the airflow. This I find to be much more helpful, and this is an airbrush, and you can have it be different strengths, and it's very, it really helps you control what you're doing. Because the ink is easily manipulable, the ink is easily manipulated, but you can also lose control of it very, very easily. I also use this occasionally. It's more of a circulation fan, and it will help the ink dry, but honestly, it dries very, very quickly, and you may not ever need something like that. It's important to prepare your surface before you get started. I like to use canvas. It's been gessoed, and I really like to put acrylic paint on it with a shimmer because that is actually going to show through because the ink is so translucent. So here I have put on a champagne gold acrylic. It is a shimmery finish. On this one, I've put pearl white and silver. To make this work so that you can manipulate it, it's usually important to put alcohol on the surface. So first I'm going to pick out the ink that I want to use because you have to do this quickly, so have your ink ready to go. And I'm going to use this little sprayer. This is going to cover a surface of about this. And I think it's important to work small with the alcohol because it will dry very quickly. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to have my blower close by because I'll need to use it very quickly. I'm going to turn it on so it's ready to go. And I'm going to spray my surface a little bit. It doesn't have to be soaking wet, just a little spritz. And I'm going to drip some oil on it. All right, now I'm going to let it sit for just a little while. And you have to be careful with it because you will splatter it occasionally. And hopefully I don't do that now, but it's quite possible that I will. You can see how it runs along the edges and spreads out. As I get closer to it, it changes color, and as I touch the canvas, it'll actually even lighten more. And don't be afraid when you get started with this. You're going to find that you're not controlling it, that it's doing its own thing, and that's okay. I've learned a lot of these techniques just from trial and error. Now we have something here. I don't know what it is, but that doesn't matter. It's whatever you want it to be. Could be a group of flowers. One thing that I think is kind of interesting, a way of bleaching the centers of these, if I can get this to work, put a little drop right in the center, and it will actually bleed a little bit of that ink out of the center of your flowers, if that's what you want it to be. So now you already have something that looks very three-dimensional with your darker pinks, your medium hues, and then your pale interiors. Let's see if I can even lighten that up a little more. You see, by doing this, you end up with a nice little ring around the edges. Now let's say that I want to put some green in here for a little bit of a stem. I'm not going to ink this because ink makes it bleed. I want this to be more it's still wet. I can still do some work with it, but you'll see how I get back from it so it doesn't go too far. All right, in a very short period of time, you've been able to create a small bouquet with some green around it, as you might see. And then you could also put a little vase. Now I'm going to try the vase. I'm not sure this is going to work, but it's always fun to try new things. Oh, here's another technique. I just did it by mistake. If you spritz the alcohol on top of it, you can get, it doesn't work with all colors, but you can get some really interesting textures by doing that. Let's see if it works on the pink. A little bit, but it worked on the green very nicely. So now you have some texture. People would look at that and say, how'd she do that? Well, easy. Took about 2 seconds. All right, I was going to try to do the vase, and I'm not sure this is going to work. Let's try blue. You don't have to shake it. I just did, and you can see why you need your gloves. It can be, especially this one tends to leak, and I don't know why. Now you can see that there's a little splatter, and that happens. Usually I just work that into the painting somehow. You can't always avoid it. See how loose it is? See how it's impossible to control? Well, you don't worry about it. I mean, it can get out of hand. But that's why I like to use different kinds of materials in addition to the inks. You could use a marker on it, a pen. You could use more ink over it. I'll show you how to do that in a second. You could use oil to define the shape of your vase. And let's see, what's this color? Oh, this is a different green. Let's try this one. Just a little bit of variation. This one's called oregano. A little brown in there. Just a little bit more dimension, a little more color. It's fun to add colors to this little bouquet. Let's do it. We're actually going to put a few things on top of the pink and see what happens. By the way, it's better to start with your lighter hues first. And keep in mind that the color you put on top will bleed into the color underneath. It's a little bit like painting with watercolors. You can see now that the pink and this lilac color have blended here, giving you a deeper hue that makes it nice. It gives it a little bit more texture and depth. Now you'll notice right here, I'm not using any ink. Excuse me, I'm not using any alcohol because I don't want it to spread too much. Just a little bit. You'll get used to manipulating the blower. Now we have a very leafy looking flower, and because it's underneath, it's a little darker because it's a little bit in the shadow. Earlier, I showed you that one of the tools that you can use is painter's tape. And I want to illustrate that by showing you this particular painting. When I set this up, I cut various widths of painter's tape and I put them on a gessoed white canvas. And I varied the sizes with the X-Acto knife, cut them some thin, some thicker, put them on, and then I started the alcohol ink application. I started up here with the blue sky. I started with my lighter shades first, as I've indicated, worked into my oranges, lighter oranges, darker oranges, ochres, dark greens, and then this reflective area that is the blue sky, the orange foliage, and a little bit of this brown at the bottom. At the end, you pull the tape off, and you'll see that you get this wonderful texture. That's because the ink goes underneath the tape just a little bit. In this still life, I used several different media. This is oil. All of this is alcohol ink, and you can see how I used a dropper to make the lighter centers, and you can see the dark edges. I did start with the lighter colors first. In this painting, I started with an acrylic shimmery background. I then textured it. You can use anything that you find that has any texture, you can put it on, paint over it, and you'll get something interesting. Then I did this alcohol ink presentation with the flowers, many layers, started light first, worked to dark, and then I came back with some oil and added some hot pink accents so that I could pop those forward. This was something that I worked on and had no idea how it was going to turn out. I started with a translucent copper background and just started playing with it, creating random flower type items, went back, painted with oil some of these stems, and added these turquoise highlights to get what sort of resembles some kind of crazy flower painting. You'll also see here some of the drips that I used to lighten the centers of the flowers. As I've indicated, one of the neat techniques that I find very interesting is to use tape to block out what you're doing. I taped this tree. You'll see it now has blue tape over it for accent. I painted the sky blue and then used oil with sponge to make the foliage. Now I'm going to try something. I'm going to see if I can create the bark effect using the gessoed canvas here that's white with the blue tape that should be an accent as I pull the tape off. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to thin out my gunmetal gray by putting just a couple of drops in here, a couple of drops of the gunmetal gray, because I want it to be kind of thin. And I'm not sure this is going to be the right color. If it's not, I can go back over it. I think it might work. So let's try this. Just brush the oil on just the way you would anything else, really. And I'll probably have to go back and highlight with some darks. I might even use oil to do that later. So you can see here how I'm brushing this alcohol ink lightly over the trunk, and I'm running out, so we'll just call this good. What I'm going to do now is turn on this little fan just to help it dry. It won't take long. I painted it very thin. All right, I think that'll be enough. All right, let's see what happens. There we go. You'll see that the ink can go under it a little bit, which gives it a really interesting look. All right, that kind of gives you an idea of what you can create if you want to do bark on a tree. This would need a lot of darker value to make this pop out, to give it more of the round shape, but this is a start. And it shows how to use another example of using tape to create highlights on your work. It's another way of manipulating the ink or using it. Now you should note, of course, that I didn't put alcohol on it first. I didn't want it to run. I wanted to actually paint with it just like I would any other paint, and that's the effect you can get.